Okay, this is round 3 of my over the board quick tournament. In this game, I have black against Steven, who's rated about 1900. He started with e4. We went for a Sicilian, and I went for the Kalashnikov variation. I don't want to get too much into the opening theory at the moment. There are a lot of good Sicilians. This is one of the decent ones. Knight b5, I played d6. This is preventing the knight from jumping into d6. And he played c4. This move is really trying to clamp down on the d5 square. It's a good move. The other main alternative is white can also play with knight c3 and just leave the pawn on c2. Both good options. I played bishop e6. I was already a little fuzzy on my opening preparation here. There's some subtleties with the move order. You don't necessarily want to play a6 right away because white's knight can drop back to c3. You kind of want white to commit the other knight to c3 first. Knight f6, sometimes you don't want to play too early because of bishop g5 allowing a pin. So, yeah, there's some stuff to think about, but there's also a lot of decent moves. Knight c3, a6. Now that the other knight is on c3, we're happy to force this knight to the rim, and g6. So this is one of the biggest specialists in this opening for black is Parham Magsudlu, and he's really popularized this setup with g6, which looks like an odd move because the bishop could already develop to e7. So g6, why are we spending an extra move to put the bishop just looking at this pawn? But by playing e4 and c4, white has weakened the d4 square. So one idea is to, at some point, put a knight there, and then it's nice to have the bishop supporting that. And if white trades that knight and this e-pawn is gone, even as a pawn sacrifice potentially, then this long diagonal will be opened up, and that bishop on g7 could be really good. Okay. So we both developed, got to this position, rook c8, just getting the rook in, b3, and now a key move, b5. It's really important for me to get some kind of pawn break to get out of this clamp white has. d5 is not really going to be possible as long as these two pawns are here. So b5 is a key move. And here my opponent spent quite a long time figuring out how to deal with this. There is a lot to think about because white can capture on b5 twice, possibly winning a pawn, but there are some issues with this knight on c3. There's a lot of tactics to consider. And this is, there's actually this is still, this is the most theoretical game I played in this tournament, I would say, because we're on move 13. This is still like a known theoretical position. There's actually a game, Anand versus Magsudlu here, that was won very brilliantly by Magsudlu, just crushing Anand, actually, which was a game I had seen. My memory of all this was a bit fuzzy, but actually this position did occur in that game. And I think in that game it went takes in Magsudlu maybe played knight e7 here. See, I don't remember exactly, but that's a cool game to check out. Anyways, my opponent played knight d5, which, well, the problem with this move is it just drops the e4 pawn. And so I'm getting that center pawn with no compensation. And one sort of theory I have about blunders is they kind of happen when you're distracted or overwhelmed by other factors. So, there's all these studies that say you can only hold, sometimes they say 4, sometimes 7 things in your head at once, but basically you can only really be thinking about a few things at a time. So I think often blunders occur when you kind of get overwhelmed thinking about too many factors. So here my opponent had to be considering all of these lines like c takes b5, a takes b5, which piece should he take? Do I then have a tactic with a discovered attack, and so on? And ultimately he played knight d5, but I guess it just slipped his attention that I could just take on e4 now. And actually I already have a borderline winning position with that center pawn. So he did take, I took back, and he played knight b4 here. If bishop b5, I think I can just take knight c3. And white can't actually hold on to all this stuff because, for instance, queen c4, knight d4, everything is attacked, or queen d3, e4, opening up this bishop, hitting the queen. Again, white just can't keep everything defended. So taking that was not an option. But after knight b4, I was able to just trade and play d5. I could also play knight c3 first. That's also good. But I just have an extra pawn and total control of the center with those two center pawns. Bishop f3. If bishop takes b5, I could just play queen a5. Or knight c3 is also good still. So bishop f3, knight c3. And queen e1. Yeah, I mean, it's not looking great for white, but also there's nothing really to suggest here. I played queen d6. Yeah, there's a lot of good moves. I could push either center pawn. So queen d6, a3, d4. And I just went ahead and picked up this pawn. Takes. Bishop c4 defending my pawn and offering a trade. So yeah, I have this really nice pawn armada here. Just rook a8. So this was the last piece to bring into the game, going after the a3 pawn, and I took this. And white did just decide to resign here because he can't even take on c4, because after this check and a trade, I would be picking up the knight as well. And there's no back rank issues because I can just block this. So down 3 pawns, my opponent just decided to call it a day here. Another pretty smooth game. This one came down more to the opening theory side of the games. The first few games were kind of out of any preparation I had pretty soon. This one we got to a theoretical position on move 13. And it was here my opponent made a mistake with knight d5. I think there's a few interesting things to say about this. One is people often assume the more opening theory they know, the better. So like if you know 7 moves, that's better than knowing 6 moves. And then if you learn the 8th move, that'll be even better. But it doesn't always work like that, because sometimes that phrase of knowing just enough to get yourself in trouble can really apply. So if you go down a main line, but then you don't know how to play it at the end of it, it can be like you're sort of parachuted into a very sharp position, which can be really dangerous. And I think that's sort of what happened to my opponent here. I do think my opening preparation kind of won me this game, not in the sense of getting a trap exactly, but I knew a few things, like, for instance, that against white's setup with c4, I wanted to play g6. And I sort of had a framework of thinking about the position. g6, aiming for control of this weak d4 square. And not just the moves, but the fact that I had a framework for thinking about the position and a sense of what I wanted to do at the end of the opening going into the middle game. Sometimes just being confident in how you're thinking about the position, what you want to do, that can really set you off on a good path. In this case, b5, my opponent wasn't able to figure out a good way to react to this pawn break, and so I already got a winning position kind of still in the opening. And from there, it was just a matter of keeping control of the game, watching out for any tactics, and just avoiding any big mistakes, just because I had such a dominant position from that point.